Chevre, how are you? I hope everyone is gesund, stark, und freilich, begashmis und berechnis. I hope everyone is healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. I hope you'll excuse me today. I'm not feeling so well. I have a bit of a cough. But still, as they say, the show must go on. People have contacted me saying we have to say Dvar Torah. So in this week's Parsha is Parshas Yisro. Yisro is where the event of Matan Torah happens. A bit is next week's Parsha also. But in, in this week's Parsha we have the Aseres Hadibros. For the first time, the Ten Commandments. So we'll start with the prayer. Atahore Solodas Ki Adinoi Ho Elohim Einoid Milvadoi. You showed yourself God. That's one interpretation. That we should know you. And that the all of reality, all of existence is the oneness of Hashem. So the truth is, you could say the story of Judaism, the real story of Judaism, starts with Matan Torah, the Sinai experience. Everything from Sinai till the coming of Mashiach is an extension, evolution of Matan Torah. That's why Matan Torah is so important. And especially this year we're in Shnas Hakel, which was a time when all the Jews would gather by the Beis HaMikdash and they would have a reenactment of Sinai to keep the fear of Hashem strong and vibrant and alive. So that means that this idea of Sinai and how we stood at Sinai and the experience of Sinai is something which is meant never to be forgotten. So, let's talk about one general point. And this is a subject we can give a 10-week lecture series on it. And that is that when we speak of Hashem and the Yidden, Yisro, Eiraisa, V'Kochevrichu, Kul Echad, Israel and Hashem are completely one. Now when we say completely one, we mean to say that it has the advantage of every single relationship. That's why, for example, there's a medrash based on a pasuk that says, L'zoz mechava, acha korabiti, L'zoz mechava, acha koraimi, etc., etc. There's a verse, God, Hashem, sometimes calls us his daughter, sometimes his sister, sometimes his wife, sometimes his mother. What's the point? The point is that in the Gashmistic world, in the physical world, every single relationship is limited, so we only have one advantage. There's an advantage of a father-daughter relationship, which is not in a brother-sister relationship. There's an advantage in a brother-sister relationship, which is not in a father-daughter relationship. And the same thing goes further. There's an advantage of a husband and wife, which is not in a brother and a sister, which is not with a father and a daughter, or with a son to a mother. So therefore, the Medrash says that Hashem, Leizos Mechavava, to bring out how much Hashem loves us, we have the advantage of every relationship. And we say the same thing in davening, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Kiyon Amecha, where Hashem's Amecha, where Hashem's flock of sheep, where Hashem's Im Kibonim, Im Kavodim. So that's what we're going to speak about today. There's two general streams. When we talk about the relationships, there's two general trends, streams, when it comes to the relationship. And that is, like we spoke many times, and Mashpir Rabbi Khan was very much into this, Bittul and Yichud. In order for our relationship with Hashem to be complete, it has to have the advantage of both Bittul and Yichud, and each one to its extreme, absolute. So for example, this is where we say, Avinu Malkeinu. On one hand, we call Hashem Avinu, our Father. On the other hand, we call Hashem our King. The relationship to a king is like a servant, a subject to a king. The relationship to a son, to a father, is different. The king has a prince, that's the son, and he has subjects. And in Chassidus, there's a big discussion about Ben Shu Eved, Eved Shu Ben. So each one has a quality. So let's discuss this. What's the advantage of one over the other? Today, we want to discuss avodim, eved. Why? Because the name, the category, the definition, the title, ben, child, was before Matan Torah. B'ni b'chayli Yisro. We're considered a son of Hashem. But Kili b'nei Yisrael avodim, avodai heim, that happened by Matan Torah. Why does it have to happen by Matan Torah? And what's the advantage of an Eved over a Ben? And this is also connected with, in this week's Parsha, it says in Kapitel Yud Tes, Pasuk Yud Zayin, at the story of Sinai, Vayetze Moshe Sa'om Nikras Elikim, Moshe brought the people forth from the camp towards Hashem, Min HaMachne, and then it says, Vayisyatzvu B'sachtis Hahor, and they stood under the mountain. Everyone knows, what does Rashi say? They stood under the mountain. So one pshat is that it's simple pshat. Beragli Ahor. It means at the foot of the mountain. But there's another pshat, Bedroshe Shenitlash Ahor Mim Koimoi. The mountain was plucked from its place, and was held over them like a barrel. And this is the famous Gemara. Hashem picked up the mountain, and he said, if you accept the Torah, fine. And if not, this is where you'll be buried. So this is one of the classic questions of Judaism. All the commentators ask, but what do you mean? The Yidden already said, Nasa Kodem Nishma. They already accepted it. They will do. And then they will hear. In other words, they pledged obedience. So why did the Eibishter have to put the mountain over them and say, do you accept it or not? They already accepted it. So to understand it, we have to understand what is the quality of obedience. But before we start with that, let me just explain the paradox. This is a paradox that runs through all of Judaism. And really, it's a Mishnah. I don't know if I ever spoke about it before, probably I did. The Mishnah says, Batel Ritzoyin Chol V'nei Ritzoyinoi. Nullify your will before his will, which seems to imply that you have another will, an opposite will. And we say, move your will aside, your personal interests aside, and do what Hashem wants. That's one part of the Mishnah. Then there's another part of the Mishnah that says, Asay, make your will his will, which means there's no other will. Your will is his will. Now, each one has a quality over the other. Let's go back to Bittel and Yichud. Now, there's another way to call it. There's Gidrei HaMekabel and Gidrei HaNoisen. When you have a relationship, especially with another being which is completely incomparable and is truly infinite. So the point is, there's one part of it which has to be Gidrei HaNoisen, since Hashem is infinite. And we are now going to graduate from being regular humans into the Jewish nation. Call it Mrs. Hashem. How are we going to transcend our limitations? How are we going to graduate from mortal beings to become a partner with Hashem? The only way to do that is that we have to completely, so to speak, eradicate, delete the previous sort of existence that we are. That means that it has to be on the terms of Gidrei HaNoisen. But on the other hand, God didn't give the Torah to angels. He wanted us to be humans that are Jews. He wanted us to be in a physical body, in a world, with physical existences, and bring holiness into the physical existence. That means that in Judaism, there's a duality, there's a paradox. That on the one hand, there's something called Gidrei HaNoisen. On the other hand, there's Gidrei HaMekabel. There has to be some aspect of the Torah, the way it's Dibra Teire B'Loshem B'nei Adam, as it addresses man. Okay. Now, these same two contrasts, Gidrei HaNoisen and Gidrei HaMekabel, we could also say is the difference between Bittel and Yichud. Bittel means the only way ultimately that the Jews become the nation that God chooses if we have to transcend completely who we were before. We have to, so to speak, evolve. And that's why there had to be Porch and Shmosa. And that's why there has to be, like we'll see, this point of why Kof Aleim HaKegigis. We'll soon explain. That's the ultimate where there's obedience, discipline, no matter what, and how we transcend ourselves. And that's why there has to be Kof Aleim HaKegigis. Now, Yichud means not when the person says, I'm doing it only because Hashem wants me to do it. That's bittul. That means I put myself aside. Yichud means that it's one with my faculties. Yichud, it's one, it's united. This is what I want. This is my desire. This is my interest. This is my gishmak. Okay. Now, let's go back to what does it mean that the Eibishter said, Kof Aleim HaKegigis, even though they said Nasa Kedlu Nishma. The point is, we have to show how the real ultimate way, now we're talking more the idea of bittul, the real ultimate way that Jews can reach transcendence, it has to be an absolute nullification. And that's only through the Kof Aleim HaKegigis. But let's start step by step. There could be one level where we just say, well, Nishma. What's luft of Nasa Kedlu Nishma? Chassidus explains, there's one level where it's a bittul to the Rotzain, and then there's another level of bittul, which is a bittul to the Baal HaRotzain. Bittul to Rotzain means we look at the details of what Hashem wants from us, and we'll do what He wants. Fine. So it's about specifics, and it's about my actions. I'm giving over my actions that I will do what Hashem wants. But if we say Nasa Koidum Nishma, which means you pledge allegiance, and you say, I'm yours. For what? Anything. We don't listen to the details. This is what really changes our identity. We're saying, it's not only that I'm giving over my actions to what you want. When I say Nasa Kedlu Nishma, I'm not giving over my actions. I'm giving over myself. It defines who I am. Like when Eliezer was asked, who are you? And he says, Eved Avrom Onechi. That's all I am. Property of the master. So too over here. When the Yidden say Nasa Koidem Nishma, they're defining themselves as subjects of the king. And to be a subject is a top-to-toe identity. Your entirety is completely, your totality is completely dedicated and devoted to the master. But in that itself could be two levels. The Rebbe explains, and we see this in next week's Parsha, about an Eved Ivri, that there's a law, there's a difference between an Eved Shemachru Bezdin and an Eved Shemoiches Atzmai. If a person is destitute and he sells himself in order to get wages, in order to pay up his debts, then the master cannot give him a Shivcha Kananis. He retains some identity. He retains some sense of self. But if it's an Eved Shemachru Bezdin, if he was forced to be sold for whatever reason, so then we say that the master, his master, a Jew, could give him a Shivcha Kananis. Why? Because the Eved Shemachru Bezdin, if you didn't decide to become a subject, but Bezdin decided forcibly, that means you have less rights, less sense of self. Then you're completely the possession of the master. So the same thing over here. The Eibishter needed that he should say, Kof Aleim HaKegigis, that we shouldn't have a choice. There's no alternative. You have to be forced. What's the advantage of being forced? The advantage of being forced, in a way, shows the ultimate transcendence. We finally transcended self. That's the whole point. We finally transcended self. We transcended our rights. It's completely about duty and responsibility, etc. Now, don't forget, I want to emphasize again and again, we're talking one side of the equation, the bittul side. And now the bittul side represents the real transcendence. Then comes the yichud. Nasa koidum nishma, but then there's nishma. So now we understand why it had to be kaf aleim hakigigas. Because that was the only way they could really evolve and go from being mere mortals that decide they want to become spiritual, or they're actually completely a different sort of being, like we have no choice. Think of it in the positive sense. We have to do what Hashem wants. We're always connected, no matter what. I had a person I know, he used to drive me to a Shir Tanya once a week. And he was about tshuva. And I asked him, how did you become about tshuva? And he told me, I always had positive feelings towards Yiddishkeit. He was from South Africa. I always loved Israel, and I always loved Judaism. I never had anything against Judaism. But one day I realized that if I want to be close to God, I have to serve God. I.e., I have to do what He wants. A relationship with Hashem is not a game, it's not a joke. It's not about me. If it's about me, then I'm really serving myself. If it's about Hashem, that means I have to serve Hashem. And that's when I decided to become a Baal Tshuva. When I heard him say this, I said, wow, that's exactly the point. Now, even though in Yiddishkeit, the whole point is, of course, bittul and yichud together. Make me, don't break me. But there has to be that unlimited devotion and dedication and loyalty. That's how it starts. Nasa koidum l'nishma. We have to also remember, this is a word I heard from Rabbi Yael, and I've definitely said it before, many times, and that is when the Rebbe Rashab was chazering the Hemshech, Umitner Rav Samach Vav, that's a Hemshech in Sefer B'Morim Tofar Samach Vav, which speaks about Eved Nemon, serving Hashem as a Eved Nemon, a loyal servant. And then he speaks over there in that Maimer about Kisher La'erlik Chamer La'masoi. You like the ox to the yoke, and the donkey to the load. And that's how the Jew should see himself, as God's possession, Hashem's possession. So in the Seder in Lubavitch was that after the Rebbe Rashab said the Maimer, the Chayzim would repeat it, or hear it, they would repeat it in front of the Rebbe Rashab. And it was the time to ask any questions or get clarity. So this time, when they were going over with the Rebbe Chazad the Maimer, how much the Eved is bottled to the Odain, how much the servant is nullified to the master, they had a perplexed look on their face. So the Rebbe Rashab said, the Kavan is the Nimshol. In the Moshel, the Rebbe Rashab said, the whole point of his elaborating about the servant who nullifies himself before the master is talking about the Nimshel. We have to take it that this is all in relation to Hashem, in relation to infinity, in relation to something which is completely bein areich. But in the Moshel, if we're talking about one mortal who's going to nullify himself to another mortal to such degree, then he has to be a Meshuggah. So this is a fantastic, powerful anecdote. Bittul is not about self-destruction. Bittul is not about crushing, self-crushing. Bittul is about transcendence, as I said before. The only way we can graduate from the level of the rest of mankind is by negating a sense of self, and then through that, becoming one with infinity. So in the end, it's about empowerment. You're becoming united with infinity. I just want to add one more point that I once heard from the Rebbe also, that the Baal Shem Tov chazed this word of kof aleim hakegigis, that they were forced, and why? And the Baal Shem Tov put it this way. You know what the idea of kof aleim hakegigis is? The advantage of being able to exercise your iskafia. Today a lot of life coaches speak about being inspired or discipline. There's creativity, there's discipline. Today, everyone understands at the end of the day that if you have creativity without discipline, you ain't going to get places. And there's many speakers that talk about the idea that discipline is freedom. Because only through discipline will you reach freedom. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov said. You know what Kof Aleim Har Kegigas is? The power of Iskafia. Hashem by Matan Torah gave every Yid the ability that even if he'll be in a situation where he's not in the mood, where he doesn't feel inspired, where he's not excited, or where he's not passionate about doing the right thing, he'll be able to go against the natural impulses of laziness and doing the wrong thing, let's say, and he'll be able to exercise self-control, self-discipline, self-restraint, and do the right thing. And that's why there had to be Kof Aleim Har Kegigas. There had to be this concept of being forced. You, like any other champions, in athletes, in athletics, and in sports, they'll all say that it's the routine and the discipline that enable them to reach the greatest heights. Because talent will only take you so far. It's only if you hone those skills and you exercise that Kof Aleim Har Kegigas, that ability, that there's no alternative, that even though today you're not in the mood and you're not excited about doing it, you're still able to do it. And this we got from Kof Aleim Har Kegigas. And this in a way is the highest level. Now we understand why by Matan Torah we have to have the new title of Avodim. Because this was the final step in our transformation of actually reaching the next level by Mount Sinai. And this I once heard a word said in the name of the Rebbe, that's why the Pasuk says, Kili b'nei Yisro avodim avodayim. Why does the Pasuk say Kili b'nei Yisro avodim avodayim? It says already Kili b'nei Yisro avodim. Why avodayim? Because this is what the Pasuk is emphasizing. Al derech evet shemechu bezdin. Avodayim, ich hab sie gemacht for avodim. I made them for avodim. Al derech the Kof Aleim Har Kegigas. That Mila. So the Eibusher should help that if we will exercise both aspects, bittul and yichud, im kibonim, im kavodim, and these are the things we should be thinking about in this Shabbos Pashas Yisro, the Shabbos of Matan Torah, how we are one with the Eibusher on every single level. It's so amazing. It's so beautiful. How Yiddishkeit speaks about every single virtue, every single value, and shows us how we incorporate in our lives all the different dimensions. So the Eibusher should help that we will do what we have to do, and the Eibusher will do what he has to do, and bring the Gula Mitzvah Shleima, take it from Yad Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisborich, your man in Melbourne.